Overall, kind of up and down. It's down from the last few months to 695,000. Just like all of the rest of the islands, the condo market is significantly slower than the single family home market. So 6.2 months of inventory in the condo market on the island of Oahu. All right, what's happening, friends? It's time for our monthly market report for April 2025. And as we always do, we're going to look at all of the islands and market data for each island individually. But this month, what we're going to do is we're going to focus in on months of supply because there's some interesting trends going on with that. And we've been seeing inventory rise over the last 6 months, and sales have been slower, and so that's going to translate into affecting the months of supply, which is basically the number of sales that are happening per month divided into the total number of properties that are on the market. And that gives you how many months, if there was no new listings coming on the market, how many months would it take for all of the listings to sell? And it's an important measurement in a real estate market of, if you're lower than 6 months of supply, it is a seller's market. And if you're greater than 6 months of supply, it is a buyer's market. And so we're going to look at that per island because there's all kinds of crazy stuff going on in the global economy, in the national economy, with politics. And of course, those things aren't going to be really seen in the real estate market until a month or two later, because real estate market data that we look at is somewhat of a lagging indicator, because sales that happen now were going under contract a month or two ago. So it's not really happening in real time. The overall effect of the bigger things that are going on don't really show up in the real estate market till a month or two later, even longer, maybe a quarter later, because it has to translate into what the humans are doing on the ground when they're buying or selling real estate. So let's jump in to the data and take a look at what's going on, starting here on the Big Island. Overall, we're up to 23 or almost 2,400 active listings, which again has been creeping up and up and up over the course of the last few months. But what I'm going to focus in on here is a 12-month summary. So over the last 12 months, what does the data look like? And the top line numbers up here, I know they're not really easy to see, shows you that there are 6.44 months of inventory. But this top line number is just overall all listings, land, condos, and residential. And so to break that down a little bit further, we have to go down here and look at each type of real estate by its individual category, and then it gives us what that number is. And so condos are at 6.7 months of inventory, so slightly into a buyer's market, but the residential market is at 5.2 months of inventory, so slightly a seller's market. But just like we've been talking about, feels very, very balanced over the course of the last few months, 6 months or so, in terms of buyer and seller market. And that's kind of right where we're at here on the Big Island, is a little bit over for condos, a little bit under for residential. And in the land market, we're at like 7.4 months, so a little bit into a buyer's market in the land market. The rest of this stuff, there's very few resident or business, commercial, or multifamily, so don't worry too much about that. So let's look at the island of Kauai as the data changes. All right, so here we go. So on the island of Kauai, we have 7.35 months of inventory overall. And so if we break that down by property type, residential is 5.6 months of inventory, so slightly a seller's market. And then in the condo market, it's 7.9, so almost 8 months of inventory. So the condo market has more inventory than the Big Island does, but the little bit stronger on the buyer's market side. So if you're on the island of Kauai and you're a buyer, you're having more choice and you're having more opportunity to negotiate. So it is advantageous for buyers on the island of Kauai right now in the condo market. And then land has 10.5 months of inventory, so even a stronger buyer's market in the land market over on Kauai.
If you're looking to relocate here on the Big Island, I want to share with you a resource that we put together. Over 80 agents from my team, expert agents here on the Big Island, put together a relocation guide that will help you evaluate all of the important factors that you want to take into account before you move here to the Big Island. School districts, healthcare, employment, all of the things that you got to think about, we put into one home buyer's guide that will help you figure out what is best when you start this relocation process here to the Big Island. So if you want this guide, just click on the link below, fill out the form. We will send you the guide for free. And if you want to take the next steps and have a conversation with us, we'd be happy to help.
So let's jump over to the island of Maui. So in Maui, looking at overall median price, jumping all over the place, it was 1.1 million for the month of March. In terms of closed sales, we actually had a little tiny uptick. So closed sales have been very, very low, very slow on the island of Maui. 98 was February, and then 110. So like a 10% jump in, even though it's just 12 sales, like a 10% jump in the number of closed sales for the month of March. But if we look at month of supply, this is an interesting stat here on Maui. So we're all the way up to 11.3 months of supply because inventory has been going up so dramatically and sales have been very, very low. This is all property types. So if we break this down by property type, there are 7.1 months of inventory in the single family home market. So again, getting into a stronger buyer's market. So above 6 months of inventory is a buyer's market. But if we look at the condo market, we have 15 months of inventory in the condo market. So the condo market is very, very slow on the island of Maui, primarily because of all the talk about banning vacation rentals and the uncertainty. People are very apprehensive right now in the condo market. But if you're looking for a great deal, there is more inventory right now on Maui in the condo market than there's been in a very, very long time. And if you look at this, if we go back to mid-22, there was 1-2 months of inventory. So if no new properties came on the market, they would all sell within the next month or two. And so it shows you how strong that market was. But now we're at 15 months. So tons and tons of inventory on the island of Maui. And then going over to Oahu. So Oahu, the average price overall kind of up and down. It's down from the last few months to 695,000. Number of closed sales did uptick a little bit. So there was 495 in February. There was 603 in March. So kind of around average. If you look the last 6 months or so, the last 12 months, it's kind of been hovering between 500 and 700 closings per month. And then looking at month of supply, which is what we've been focusing on all the islands, this is all property types. So on average, 5.1 months of supply, so slightly a seller's market. But if we break this down into property types and just look at single family homes, we are at 3.5 months of inventory. So single family homes still in a pretty strong seller's market on the island of Oahu. But if we look at condos, just like all of the rest of the islands, the condo market is significantly slower than the single family home market. So 6.2 months of inventory in the condo market on the island of Oahu. Still pretty much a balanced market, but tipping towards the buyer side of the market for condos on the island of Oahu. So very interesting. Across the state, we're seeing that same trend happening in the condo market. The condo market is slower on every single island. Those months of inventory are starting to rise and becoming more advantageous for buyers in the condo market. But overall, it's still pretty balanced. It doesn't feel crazy. It feels pretty calm. We're starting to see a little bit of an uptick. March was an uptick in number of closed sales across the board on all the islands, a little bit more activity. And then we'll see in the month of April what happens based on all the stuff that's going on in the world. But if you want a specific breakdown of your market in your area, your neighborhood where you live, you can always reach out to us. Dylan@buybigisland.com is the email address. There's always a link to book a meeting in the description below, but we're happy to talk about your specific needs in your specific area because, of course, markets are very micro and you could have a very different market in one condo complex to another one. And we want to make sure we're looking specifically at your situation and get you the best information possible. So as always, appreciate you guys watching this month's market report. I'll see you guys next month. Aloha.